It was a busy Friday night at the Golden Spoon, a small, family-owned restaurant. The air was warm, filled with the smell of sizzling garlic and the hum of happy customers. Behind the counter, Lily, the owner's 20-year-old daughter, was rushing between tables. But the mood shifted when a group of four men walked in. Their voices were too loud. Their comments were disrespectful. They began to press Lily, cornering her against a wall while everyone else looked away. In a dark corner of the room, a woman sat alone. Elena Ward, a nurse just off a 16-hour shift. She looked exhausted. She looked weak. But in seconds, everything changed forever. Elena Ward was beyond exhausted. Her feet felt like lead weights inside her nursing clogs, and her eyes burned from staring at flickering monitors for 16 hours straight in the intensive care unit. She hadn't even had time to take off her faded blue scrub, which still carried the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic and hospital floor wax. All she wanted was a bowl of hot soup and 10 minutes of silence before going home to a dark, empty apartment. To the other diners in the room, she was just a nobody. A middle-aged woman with messy hair tied in a loose bun, no makeup, and a slumped, defeated posture. They saw a victim. They didn't see the woman who had spent her entire day bringing people back from the very edge of death. Elena's mind was still back at the hospital. She was thinking about the patient in bed 4, the one whose heart had stopped twice that afternoon. She could still feel the vibrations of the chest compressions in her palms. She could still hear the frantic beep of the EKG monitor. In the world of the ER, silence is a luxury you never get. Coming to the Golden Spoon was supposed to be her sanctuary. It was a place where the only thing that mattered was the temperature of the soup and the kindness of the service. But as she sat there, the peace she was looking for started to evaporate. The Golden Spoon was a small place, but it was Lily's world. Her father, the owner, was a kind man with flour on his apron who spent his life in the kitchen, pouring his soul into every plate of pasta. Lily was his pride and joy. She moved with a grace that usually made customers smile, but tonight she was trembling. The group of men at table 4 had been there for over an hour. They weren't there for the food. They were there for the power trip. They were the kind of men who confused volume with importance and cruelty with strength. It started with small things. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you sit on my lap and help me read the menu?" the leader shouted. His voice was a jagged blade that cut through the pleasant music in the room. His breath smelled of cheap whiskey and arrogance. Lily tried to laugh it off, moving to the next table with a forced smile, but they wouldn't let her go. They blocked her path with their heavy chairs. They made comments about the way her uniform fit. They grabbed her sleeve when she tried to walk away, pulling her back toward their table. The leader was a man who clearly liked being the center of attention. He was leaning back in his chair, feet kicked out into the aisle, forcing Lily to walk a long way around him. Every time she passed, he would make a comment about her eyes, her hair, her smile. It was in slow, methodical erosion of her comfort. Lily's father was stuck in the kitchen, a victim of his own success as he tried to keep up with the Friday night rush. He didn't see the way the leader was looking at his daughter. He didn't see the way the other 3 men were whispering and laughing, their eyes following Lily's every move with a predatory hunger. The other waiters were young students, barely 20 years old themselves. They were paralyzed by the sheer size of these men. These weren't just rowdy customers. They were thugs. They were tall, muscular, and had the look of men who enjoyed the feeling of someone else's fear. One of the waiters tried to intervene, offering to take over Lily's table, but the leader just shoved him aside. "We like the girl," he barked. "Send her back or don't send anyone at all." The rest of the patrons did what people usually do when they sense a predator. They looked down at their plates. They suddenly found their salad very interesting. They chose the comfort of silence over the danger of conflict. They weren't bad people. They were just scared. They didn't want to be the one who got hit. They didn't want to be the one who made the scene. So they let the silence grow, and in that silence, the bullies grew stronger. Elena watched everything from her dark corner. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a loud, intimidating voice. But she had something these men couldn't comprehend, a clinical perspective. In the hospital, Elena dealt with difficult people every single hour. She dealt with the panic of the dying, the aggression of the drugged, and the chaos of the grieving. She sat there slowly stirring her soup, watching the men's body language with a cold, analytical eye. She saw the way the leader was shifting his weight, leaning forward, preparing to escalate his harassment into something physical. She noticed the way his pupils were dilated. She noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a sign of excessive adrenaline mixed with alcohol. She saw Lily's breathing becoming shallow and rapid, the physiological markers of a brewing panic attack. Elena knew exactly what was about to happen. She had seen this movie 1,000 times in the triage room. Someone was going to get hurt, and if nobody stood up, it would be the girl. Elena didn't stand up immediately. She wasn't a hero in a comic book. She was a professional. She took a slow sip of her water. She waited. She wasn't afraid of them. When you spend your life looking death in the eye and demanding it waits its turn, 4 bullies in a restaurant don't seem that intimidating. But she knew that in this world, people like her are often underestimated. Her exhaustion was her camouflage. She looked like an easy target. She looked like someone who would keep her head down. And tonight, that would be her greatest advantage. She watched the leader reach out his hand, his fingers twitching with anticipation. He was about to do something he couldn't take back. Elena felt a familiar spark deep in her chest, the same spark that ignited when a patient's heart stopped. It wasn't anger. It was focus, pure clinical focus. She was no longer just a tired woman eating soup. She was a guardian at the gate of a life about to be ruined. If you think many people hesitate to step in when it matters, comment. That is unfair. The air in the restaurant became thick and heavy, like the atmosphere before a massive thunderstorm. The leader of the group, a man with a thick, scarred neck and a cruel, jagged smile, finally stood up. He didn't just talk anymore. He invaded Lily's space with a violent intent. He backed her into a wooden pillar near the bar, trapping her like a bird in a cage. Lily's tray rattled in her hands, the sound of metal on metal echoing through the now silent room. A glass of water tipped over, soaking her white apron, but she was too terrified to even notice the cold. She was looking for an exit, her eyes darting left and right, but the other 3 men had moved their chairs out, effectively blocking the aisle. "I asked you a question, little girl," the leader growled. His voice dropped to a low, menacing tone that vibrated in the chests of everyone nearby. "Are you going to be nice to us, or do we have to teach you some manners ourselves?" The man's friends were egging him on. "Go on, boss, show her how we do things," one said, leaning back with a smug grin. They thought they were untouchable. They thought that because they were bigger and louder, they owned the room. They were feeding off each other's toxicity, creating a cycle of aggression that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The leader reached out and traced a finger down Lily's arm. She flinched as if she had been burned. A couple at the booth next to them quickly stood up, their faces pale. They paid their bill with trembling hands and hurried out the door without looking back. They didn't want to be witnesses. They didn't want to be involved. It was easier to pretend the fire wasn't happening as long as their own skin wasn't burning. Elena watched them leave. She didn't blame them. Courage is a heavy weight, and not everyone is built to carry it. But she also knew that their departure had emboldened the leader. He saw it as a victory. He saw it as proof that he could do whatever he wanted. Elena put her spoon down with a soft clink. Her physical exhaustion was still there, weighing down her bones, but a different feeling was rising to the surface. It was the code blue instinct, the mental state where time slows down and everything becomes a series of tasks to be completed. She began to analyze the situation like a medical chart. She wasn't seeing men, she was seeing anatomy. She was seeing joints, nerves, and points of failure. Number of threats, 4. Average weight, 200 pounds. Physical state, intoxicated but still coordinated. Space, cramped, limited room for wide movements. Weapon potential, heavy glass bottles on the table, a steak knife near the leader's right hand. Escapes, the back kitchen was too far for Lily. The front door was blocked by the thugs' chairs. Elena knew that if she intervened poorly, she would just become the second victim. She wasn't a martial arts master, but she was an emergency room nurse. She knew human anatomy better than anyone in that room. She knew where the nerves lived. She knew exactly where the joints were weakest. She knew how much pressure it took to make a strong man's knees buckle without even throwing a punch. She thought about her training, not the combat kind, but the de-escalation kind. Control the space, her instructors had said. Control the pace. In the hospital, you don't fight a violent patient. You redirect them. You use their own momentum and their own biology to stop the threat. You find the pressure points that the brain cannot ignore. Elena felt her heartbeat slow down. Her breathing became rhythmic and deep. She was moving into a state of calm alert. She watched as the leader reached out his thick hand and grabbed Lily's chin, forcing the girl to look directly into his drunken eyes. He was leaning in close now, his face inches from hers. The other three men stood up, forming a wall of muscle around their leader. They were shielding him from view, or so they thought. But Elena had a clear line of sight. That was the moment. The line had been crossed from disrespectful behavior to physical assault. Lily let out a small choked sob that broke the heart of anyone listening, yet nobody moved. The other three men laughed, a chorus of hyenas enjoying the sight of her helplessness. Elena stood up. She didn't scream, "Stop," or "Help." She knew from experience that those sounds only feed a bully's ego, giving them the attention they crave. Instead, she smoothed the wrinkles in her blue scrubs and walked toward the table with a calm, steady gait. She looked like a woman who was simply going to ask for more napkins or refill on her tea. She looked like the most harmless person in the room. The men didn't even notice her until she was 5 feet away. Their attention was entirely on their prey, their backs turned to the tired nurse. Elena counted their heartbeats in her head. 1, 2, 3. She felt the cool floor beneath her feet. She felt the air against her skin. She was no longer the woman who had worked 16 hours. She was a force of nature, moving with a purpose that the thugs couldn't even imagine. She was beginning a procedure, and in her world, procedures were always followed to the letter. She stepped between the leader and Lily, breaking his line of sight. If you realize timing matters more than reacting instantly, comment, "I was wrong." Elena stepped into the circle of thugs. She didn't look at the leader's face, she looked at his center of gravity. "Step back," she said. Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a cold, surgical command. It was the same voice she used when a panicked doctor was making a mistake in the OR. It was the voice that demands absolute obedience because life is on the line. The restaurant went so quiet you could hear the water dripping from Lily's apron. The leader turned his head, blinking in confusion. He saw a tired nurse with dark circles under her eyes. He saw a woman he thought he could crush with his pinky finger. He let go of Lily and let out a jagged, ugly laugh. "Get lost, lady. Go back to the hospital before you get hurt. This ain't your business. You're lucky I don't slap that tired look off your face." He reached out a massive, tattooed hand to shove Elena's shoulder, intending to send her flying into the next table. He expected her to fall. He expected her to cry. He expected her to be like everyone else in the room. But Elena didn't move backward. She moved forward. In the ER, you learn how to handle aggressive, drug-fueled patients who weigh twice as much as you without ever using a weapon. You don't use muscle. You use physics and biology. As his hand made contact with her shoulder, Elena didn't resist the force. She flowed with it. She grabbed his wrist and his elbow in a lightning-fast motion, using his own momentum against him. She didn't use strength. She used a simple mechanical lever. With a swift, practiced twist, the kind used to restrain a violent patient without causing permanent damage, she sent him spiraling face first into the table. Crash! The plates shattered. The leader's face slammed into a pile of cold mashed potatoes and broken ceramic. His arm was pinned behind his back in a hyperextended position that made his shoulders scream in agony. He tried to thrash, to fight back, but Elena's knee was pressed firmly into a specific nerve cluster on his lower back, the sciatic pressure point. He was paralyzed by a sudden electric surge of pain that made his vision go white. He was pinned by a woman half his size, and he couldn't even lift his head. The other three men froze in absolute shock. They couldn't understand what they were seeing. Their leader, a 200-pound thug who had spent his life fighting, was being held down by a tired woman in wrinkled blue scrubs. It defied their logic. It broke their reality. They stood there with their mouths open, like statues in a museum of stupidity. The second man, fueled by rage and embarrassment, lunged forward. He threw a wild, uncoordinated punch toward Elena's head. She didn't even blink. Her clinical mind was already 3 steps ahead. She stepped to the left, her movements as efficient as a suture. She grabbed a heavy metal tray from the service counter and slammed it into his solar plexus with the force of 10 years of built-up frustration. He folded like a piece of wet paper, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his lungs seizing up in a temporary spasm. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, eyes bulging. "Lily, go to the kitchen, now!" Elena commanded. Lily didn't hesitate. She ran. The spell was broken. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely flipped. The predators were now the patients. Elena stood her ground, her posture no longer slumped but rigid, professional, and deadly. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't angry. She was just working. She pointed a single finger at the third man, who was reaching for a glass bottle on the table. "If you pick that up," she said, her voice like a sheet of ice, "I will ensure you spend the next 6 months in intensive physical therapy. Do you think I don't know exactly where to strike you so you'll never walk the same way again? I know every nerve, every tendon, and every bone in your body. I spend my life fixing them. I can just as easily unfix them. I can touch a spot on your neck that will put you to sleep before you can blink. Want to see?" It wasn't a threat. It was a clinical diagnosis. The men looked into her eyes and saw something they had never encountered before. They didn't see a victim. They didn't even see a fighter. They saw a professional who understood the fragility of the human body better than they understood their own names. They saw someone who dealt with blood, trauma, and death every single day. They saw someone who was simply too tired to take any more of their nonsense. They saw the difference between someone who wants to hurt and someone who knows how to hurt. The third and fourth men looked at their leader, who was still groaning with his face in the potatoes. They looked at their friend on the floor, curled in a ball, trying to remember how to breathe. They looked at Elena, who hadn't even broken a sweat, and they did the only thing their cowardice allowed. They backed away. They weren't brave enough to fight someone who wasn't afraid of them. "Help your friends out of here," Elena said, releasing her grip on the leader. She didn't want to fight. She wanted the infection removed from the room. She watched them scramble to pick up their fallen comrades, their bravado replaced by a frantic, stumbling fear. They dragged their leader out, his face covered in mashed potatoes and shame. They fled like rats from a sinking ship. In less than 60 seconds, the tired nurse had dismantled a threat that had terrified an entire room of people. She didn't use a gun. She didn't use a knife. She used the authority of someone who knows what truly matters when the clock is ticking. She stood in the middle of the restaurant, the only calm thing in a storm of broken glass and spilled water. She was the ICU nurse again. Control regained. Procedure completed. If you believe control and calm thinking are stronger than aggression, comment, "I am indebted." The restaurant fell into a silence so deep you could hear the hum of the old refrigerator in the back. The manager and the owner finally burst out from the kitchen, alerted by the sound of breaking plates, but the danger was already shuffling out the front door. The 4 thugs were limping, their heads down, their previous arrogance replaced by a frantic need to get as far away as possible from the woman in the blue scrubs. Elena didn't chase them. She didn't shout insults at their backs. She didn't even look at them as they left. She immediately turned her full attention to Lily. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked. Her voice had transformed instantly. The surgical ice was gone, replaced by the gentle, soothing tone she used for frightened children in the pediatric ward. It was a voice designed to lower heart rates and stabilize blood pressure. It was the voice of safety. Lily nodded, though tears were finally streaming down her face in heavy waves. She was shaking violently, her hands still clutching the wooden pillar for support. Elena didn't hug her immediately. She knew from her training that after a trauma, Some people feel claustrophobic if they are touched too soon. Instead, she pulled out a clean chair and guided Lily down into it. She took Lily's wrist, not to restrain her, but to check her pulse. She spoke in a low, rhythmic, grounding voice. Deep breaths for me, Lily. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 4. You're safe now. The room is clear. Just focus on my voice. You're doing great. Just keep breathing. The owner, Lily's father, rushed over, his face white with shock and guilt. He began to thank Elena frantically, offering her money, free meals for life, anything he could think of. He was babbling, his mind racing through the what-ifs of the situation. He looked at his daughter, then at the broken glass, then at the small woman who had saved them both. He was a man who had spent his life feeding people, and he didn't know how to handle someone who had just saved his life. Elena just held up a hand to quiet him. She looked at her watch. I just want my soup, sir. If it's not too much trouble, and maybe a clean glass for the girl. She needs some sugar for the shock. Get her some orange juice. The other customers, who had been frozen in their seats, were now beginning to whisper. The bystander effect was fading, replaced by a surge of collective shame and awe. They were looking at Elena with new eyes. She was no longer a nobody. She was a giant. A man from the back table walked over, his eyes wide with respect. That was incredible. You should be a police officer or a bodyguard. I've never seen anyone move like that. You took them down like they were nothing. Elena looked up at him, her eyes heavy with a fatigue that no amount of coffee or praise could ever fix. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the 16-hour shift was catching up to her again. I'm a nurse, she said simply. I don't have time to be a cop. I spend my 12-hour shifts trying to fix what people like them break. I'm just tired of people hurting each other. I'm tired of seeing the consequences of cruelty. She didn't want to be a hero. She didn't want the attention. She just wanted a world where a 20-year-old girl could serve a table without being treated like prey. She finished her soup in the middle of the crowded, whispering room, paid her bill exactly as if nothing had happened, and left a $50 tip on the table for Lily. As she walked out the door and into the cool night air, she looked like just another nobody again. Just a woman in wrinkled scrubs heading home to sleep. But Lily watched her through the window until she disappeared around the corner, knowing that she had just seen a guardian angel who didn't need wings. Just a nursing degree, a calm mind, and a very long shift. She realized that the most dangerous person in the room wasn't the one with the loudest voice. It was the one with the most to protect. If you believe stepping in at the right moment can protect others, comment, I will live kindly. In our world, we often mistake silence for weakness. We see someone who is tired, someone who doesn't shout to get attention, someone who stays in the shadows of the room, and we think they are easy targets. We think they are the ones who will fold when the pressure is applied, but we are wrong. The truly strong people in this life don't need to bark to prove their bite. They don't need to flex their muscles to prove they exist. They don't need to dominate the room because they already know who they are. Elena Ward didn't defeat those men with violence. She defeated them with clarity. She saw a situation that was fundamentally wrong, and she used the skills she had spent a decade perfecting to make it right. She didn't escalate the situation into a bloody brawl that would have left Lily even more traumatized. Instead, she neutralized it like a doctor neutralizing a toxin in a patient's bloodstream. She was a professional handling a problem. Being a nurse isn't just about giving medicine or checking charts. It's about maintaining order in the face of absolute chaos. It's about being the person who stays calm when everyone else is screaming. It's about protecting the vulnerable when the rest of the world turns its back and looks at its own plate. Elena didn't act because she wanted to be famous or because she wanted a story to tell. She acted because it was her job. It's what she does every day, whether there's an audience or not. In the ER, there are no cameras. There are no medals. There is only the next patient. The next time you see someone who looks exhausted, someone who looks like they've carried the weight of the entire world on their shoulders for just a little too long, don't underestimate them. Don't mistake their fatigue for fragility. Behind those tired, burning eyes might be a strength you can't even imagine. A strength that knows exactly where your weaknesses are because it has spent a lifetime repairing them in others. A strength that isn't afraid to stand up when everyone else is sitting down because it has seen the cost of silence. Elena went home that night, climbed into her bed, and finally slept. She didn't dream of the thugs. She didn't dream of the fight. She didn't dream of the mashed potatoes on the leader's face. She dreamed of a quiet hospital ward where every light was green and every patient was healing. She dreamed of a world where people were kind to each other because they understood how fragile a human life really is. Because at the end of the day, that's all a nurse ever really wants. Peace. She woke up the next afternoon, put on a fresh pair of blue scrubs, and went back to work. She walked past the Golden Spoon on her way to the hospital. Lily was there, serving a family with a genuine smile on her face. They exchanged a small silent nod through the window. No words were needed. Elena walked into the ER, checked her first chart, and started her next 16-hour shift. She was just a nobody again, just a tired nurse. But the world was a little bit safer because she was in it. And if anyone ever threatened that peace again, she would be ready. Because true strength isn't about the power of the hand. It's about the resolve of the heart. But if you are the one who breaks that peace, may God help you if a nurse is the one who has to come and fix it. Because they know exactly how to put you back together and exactly how to stop you. If you believe true strength is protecting others without escalating the situation, leave a comment below. And if this story reminds you that calm, controlled action can make all the difference, don't forget to subscribe for more.